What is up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Backup Fantasy Sports. It is Wednesday, January 31st. My name is Ewan. On today's episode, we're going to get into some F1 fantasy with my Constructor price predictions. This is part 2 of my price prediction series. Last week, I did the drivers. Yes, great guess by you if you went there. So check that video out if you haven't looked at it already. At the end of this episode, I will be building 3 potential teams with my prices that I've kind of put together here. So check that out. If you don't want to miss a video for the rest of the F1 fantasy content in the preseason this year, like and subscribe to the channel or the podcast if you're listening on the audio side, just to always get that F1 fantasy content. I'm going to try and put out a video every Wednesday up through the preseason. Liveries are starting to come out next week. Preseason testing is right around the corner. So definitely stay tuned to the channel where I will be keeping you up to date on all the goings on in the F1 fantasy world. But let's get into here. This is what I did last week, kind of my theology behind how I was going to put these prices together. So last year, here are the starting prices: Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, top 3. That's going to be the top 3 again this year. But Alpine was 4th, McLaren was 5th, Aston Martin all the way down there in 6th. We all know how that went. Terrible pricing to start the game, as we all were on triple Red Bull, triple Aston Martin for the beginning of the year. Very meta, very template. So hopefully they do not go there this year with the potential leaps that some teams are making in F1 over the course of the offseason. So that's where everyone started last year. This is where they ended up in the F1 fantasy points standing. So it was Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, Aston Martin, Alpine, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, Haas, and Williams all the way down there in last. No surprise there. Everyone had Red Bull. Red Bull were dominant thanks to Max Verstappen's phenomenal season. Mercedes and Ferrari were close, but McLaren really came on in the second half of the year, and they are going to get their reward in my price prediction. So here's my price prediction process. I did this with the drivers as well. I kind of looked at where everyone started in 2023, where everyone ended, and then I kind of tried to get in between there for my 2024 prices. So 2023 start was $123.3 million between all of the constructors. Top 3 had 60% of it, top 6 had 81%, and bottom 4 had 18.7%. There you go, some math for you. By the end of the year, the top 3 had become just under 52% of the budget. Top 6 was 80%, and the bottom 4 had risen a little bit to 19.5. So for 2024 here, I have decided that 58.2% will go towards the top 3 teams. Top 6 teams will get just under 82%, and the bottom 4 will get a little reduction, 18.1% of the budget, as I do think the bottom 4 teams could be especially weak in 2024. Let's kick it off here with the bottom 4 teams that I just mentioned. And yes, you can see that correctly. Those are 2 liveries on there that are just blank outlines of an F1 car, because Kick Sauber and Visa Cash App RB have not released their liveries as of this video on Wednesday, January 31st. So there you go. But yes, these are my bottom 4 teams. Might be a little surprising here. I've got Haas at the bottom. That's probably not surprising, but I got Williams over Kick Sauber. This is a belief in Alex Albon, kind of the management. Williams on the up. I think they are going to be the 3rd or the 8th best car on the grid. The 3rd least bad, I guess, on the grid here. Haas and Sauber, don't believe in them at all. Don't really like their lineup all that much either. Alexander Albon is the best driver among the 6 in those bottom 3 teams. He's probably the best driver among the bottom 4 teams in general, but Williams with Logan Sargent, that's going to cost them quite a lot. As you saw, they finished bottom of the constructor standings in F1 Fantasy last season. A lot of that was due to Logan Sargent's DNF penalties. So hopefully the American can avoid those in his 2nd year on the grid, and it helps Williams rise up. Visa Cash App RB, which I'm still not sure we're going to call them. I saw Adam F1 Fantasy HQ saying he was going to call them V Carb. Maybe I'm not sure I can get there yet, but we will see. Something will catch on during preseason testing. Maybe I'll just wait for the F1 guys on the commentary team to kind of tell me what I should call them moving forward. 6.2 million for them. Definitely a budget option at the beginning of the season, and kind of in my thinking if my prices are anywhere close, as you will see in my potential team builds. Next two here, Alpine and Aston Martin. So Alpine gets penalized for their terrible 2023, at least terrible in terms of what we were expecting. They drop all the way down to 6.7. So they're like right there in the weird middle class of the grid. They suffer like the biggest penalty, and they kind of take the biggest hit because I needed to put some money up in these heavy hitter constructors at the top. Aston Martin gets a huge price rise from the 2023 start, 10.2 million. I'm hoping the way I've kind of put all these prices together is I want almost every team to kind of be an option. And that's what I would hope that the F1 guys running the game would also want. That way we can all kind of have different strategies. Because last year with the meta, it was getting a little boring there. The shirt I'm wearing right now, the Mercedes team, like they were an afterthought until the end of the season when people were taking swings, when the car had kind of finally fully developed. So hopefully these prices would enable us to all kind of use any team that we would want moving forward. So here's the top four after that. McLaren, first team to launch their livery of the year, surprise release. They haven't actually done their full on launch, but this is what the car is going to look like in 2024. Looks nice. I like it. As a McLaren fan, always nice to see the car looking good there, but 12.3 million for them is where I'm going to start them off in my price predictions. That is going to seem low, and admittedly it feels low even when I put it on there, put it on the Google slides, presented it to y'all on this YouTube video. Still feels low, but I don't want them to be so priced that it's like impossible to fit them in your team, because McLaren is fun. They're supposed to kind of like, they're just outside the top three. I think they could fight them a little bit. The consistency could be there. This could make them kind of Aston Martin-y, but last year Aston Martin were 6.5, 6.7 million when they started. McLaren 12.3. You are going to have to pony up to get the papaya in your opening lineup for F1 Fantasy 2024. Next up here is Ferrari, jumping all the way up here, 20.9 million. Still believe in the red Italian cars. 20.9 million. Carlos Sainz, Charles Leclerc, still a strong team, strong lineup that can get a lot of points any given weekend. They took a hit on last year's price point, but that's only because Red Bull has to go up a tiny bit because they were dominant. So kind of building the price gap there, trying to make Ferrari and the next team up here more of a viable option for our F1 Fantasy 2024 teams. Mercedes, 22.8 million here. So obviously that's a little bit worse than they started last year. But then, like I was saying, we didn't even have them in our team for most of the season because they cost too much. They weren't performing nearly as well as Red Bull. Like, it wasn't that hard to get up from Mercedes to Red Bull. So it kind of just eliminated them as an option in our F1 fantasy teams. The talk out of Mercedes has been fairly positive over the offseason. The testing here, as you can see in the sidebar below my face right now, preseason testing February 21st through the 23rd. Definitely going to keep an eye on that, see how the silver arrows look for the 2024 season. But yeah, I've got them priced at 22.8 million right now in F1 Fantasy. And all the way at the top, no surprise here, 28.1 million. There were a few of you that commented on my driver price predictions. We were having a good discussion about what Red Bull should be priced at. My initial run here, when I just did it like straight through the little model thing that I built, like Red Bull was 30.3 million. I was like, that is so much money. I don't think they are going to price Red Bull at 30 million. I would kind of love if they did, because it would make them pretty difficult to get into your F1 fantasy lineup as long as they keep the construction the same that they had last year. but I put them at 28.1 million, still a huge gap from them versus Mercedes. It is still going to make it very hard to fit Red Bull and Max in your F1 fantasy lineup. So here is the summary of the constructor prices that I have here. Red Bull 28.1, Mercedes 22.8, Ferrari 20.9, McLaren 12.3, Aston Martin 10.2, Alpine 6.7, Visa Cash App RB 6.2, Williams 5.7, Kick Sauber 5.3, and Haas all the way down there at 5.1. This is where I had the driver's price from last week's video. So once again, go check that out. But here's a quick summary if you can't watch the full video. 20 drivers all the way from Max Verstappen at 27.5 million all the way down to Logan Sargent at 4 million here. Lots of prices. Norris kind of right outside the top 6 there. Hopefully this will make for some interesting lineup constructions. Speaking of lineup constructions, I just wanted to have 3 potential builds with my price predictions here, just kind of show us what we could expect if these prices are anywhere close when the game launches at a to be determined date. So with a budget cap of 100 million, here I have Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, Lance Stroll, and Yuki Tsunoda with Red Bull and Visa RB. That gets you all the way up to 98.3 million. So really not a lot of space to maneuver around here if you want 2 Red Bull assets. You do get double McLaren, double Visa RB, double Red Bull, and Lance Stroll in his Aston Martin. And you could go all the way up to a Pierre Gasly here. That would give you some space there, but it's really tight in the budget with these price predictions that I have going on. So this is kind of the well-rounded version. I think if prices came out here, like McLaren was a hot team, Red Bull is obviously a phenomenal team. You could get all of this in under $100 million budget. Build number 2 here would be no Max Verstappen and no Red Bull, which already sounds blasphemous in F1 fantasy circles, but it would be a cool on the dot $100 million for this team that I'm about to say. Sergio Perez, 21.3, Carlos Sainz, 16.7, Lando Norris, 14.6. So that's a lot of heavy hitters at the top. And then you also get Alexander Albon and Yuki Tsunoda. So that's a really stacked lineup of drivers. And then you also can afford Mercedes and McLaren there. So that's maybe more of a well-rounded team. Unfortunately, with the way the F1 fantasy worked last year, it really did pay to have the heavy hitters. Like you get all the points for winning, like the championship points, 25 points just for the race winner. And then your constructor also gets it. So maybe in an ideal world with some rule changes, this team would be more viable, would make the game more fun. Perez, Sainz, Norris, like this is on the dot, 100 million. And I was quite pleased when I put this all into the calculator and found out that it would work. Mercedes, McLaren, yeah, I kind of love this lineup. It would make it a lot more fun if not to get Max out of the F1 fantasy game, but if we could all have an option to maybe not have him in our team and feel like we weren't losing ground on the rest of the field. Final build here. This is the supercharged stars and scrubs if you play American fantasy football in a salary cap league or something like that. Stars and scrubs right here. Verstappen, Perez, Red Bull, all in the lineup. Yeah, it's a lot of money, but you can get there. So you go Verstappen 27.5, Sergio Perez 21.3, Alexander Albon 6.8, Yuki Tsunoda 5.5, and Logan Sargent 4.0. That's all you can really get up to there. Red Bull and Visa Cash App RB doesn't stick in the mouth as much as I thought it would. I guess you can kind of say it. Couldn't say it 3 times fast, but that would get you to 99.4 million. Definitely front loaded with Red Bull. I mean, you've got 5 Red Bull assets right there. 6 if you want to include Alexander Albon as a former Red Bull driver himself. But this would be pretty risky. Obviously, you wouldn't have any of the middle ground of the drivers here. You'd be all in on Red Bull, which is not a bad strategy in F1 fantasy, as a lot of people found out in the 2023 game. But yeah, this is another potential build that you could do with my price predictions for the 2024 season. But that's going to do it for this week's episode. But let me know in the comments below what you thought was pretty good pricing, what you thought was terrible pricing, what you would build with my prices, how your lineup would look for day one. Hopefully that game launches soon because it's almost February. That means F1 is coming around this month. It's going to be very, very exciting. Can't wait for the game to launch. Hopefully it's sooner than it was last year, but I will be back next week with kind of an off-season roundup notes. There will be some liveries on display, so we'll take a look at those as well. But don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel or the podcast if you're listening on the audio side, and follow me on X at UNFPL and TikTok as well. I'm also on there at UNFPL. But once again, thanks for listening, and I will talk to you next time.